What's up, everybody? Welcome to Bitcoin Daily. I'm Dante Cook, head of Swan Business. I don't know if you've been paying attention or not, or checking your Swan mobile app, but the price of Bitcoin is back over 66K. And Bitcoin continues to ride up while the rest of the world is out. And I thought today would be another day to do an interesting look at why Bitcoin is so phenomenal. And one of its most undervalued traits and assets is that it's anti-fragile in a centralized digital world. So let's take a look today at some of the reasons why this is important, what the latest tech outages in CrowdStrike have to do with Bitcoin, and lessons we can learn from that. Without further ado, let's get into it. Unless you've been hiding under a rock or not checking your app, Bitcoin is back over 66K and is approaching 67K as we speak. And this just goes to prove one of the reasons why Bitcoin is such a good inflation hedge, which is the primary thing that people talk about when they talk about Bitcoin. Here's a video that's been circulating this week that shows how the cost of inflation have changed the lives and impacted people from our grandparents to us today. Great video going around on Twitter. Let's take a look.
1970, the average home was $15,000. It is now $436,000. It has gone up 29 times. Rent was $108, is now $2,000. That's gone up 20 times. College was $500. It's now $11,000. That's gone up 20 times. Gas was 36 cents. It's now $3.80. That has gone up 10 to 12 times. But what about the income? In 1970, the average person was making $9,000. Today, they're making $56,000. That has only gone up 6 times compared to everything else. But here's where this is where it gets sad. In 1970, the average household had 3.5 children. Today, it's only 1.9. And the crazy part is that back in 1970, the average household, 47% were dual income. It has now jumped to 65% is dual income. So millennials and Gen Zers under the household are putting in more hours than the boomers did. We're both working 40 hours a week, but you got way more bang for your buck and more children. You got to expand your family, own a house. Things are so drastically different. The birth rate is...
So one of the things that people talk about as it relates to Bitcoin is its ability to protect our purchasing power and our ability to shield us from fiat debasement, which causes the nominal cost of things to go up. And if our incomes and our purchasing power or savings aren't rising faster than that, then we are getting poor over time. And this guy in this video does a great job of explaining these sorts of things. But today I want to take some time to talk about one of the undervalued things about Bitcoin is its decentralized nature and its ability to be anti-fragile. You see, Bitcoin's pumping today amidst a massive tech outage, and it's not just about the price going up. It actually highlights a key theme that I think we need to think about and focus on. So the Dow's down 400 points, and the S&P 500 is heading for its worst week in 3 months, and the S&P has been fairly strong this year. And the world is learning what Bitcoiners already know, that centralized systems can cause problems, as there's been 3 major airlines that have been shut down for the majority of the day today. And CrowdStrike had an update that crashed their Windows, and they're calling it the largest IT outage of all time. You can see here some computer screens at the airport to show what I'm talking about. But the key theme of this outage was this blue screen of death right here is what they've been calling it. And if you've been to Vegas, the bubble would show you a bunch of things that you didn't want to see, you didn't care to see, things that you shouldn't buy, that you don't need to impress people that you don't know. But today it's showing you this outage window with a sideways frowny face and some stock content from Microsoft. And, you know, it wasn't just things that are unimportant. There were some really critical industries that were impacted by this outage. Hospitals, airlines, police stations, banks. People were unable to get their money. This isn't a third world country or a country in upheaval, but in the United States, because of the centralization effect, city governments, and if you're a race fan, Mercedes Formula One team actually couldn't access the data for one of their drivers that was out on the track. So things like that could get really scary for people. And this isn't the first time. Back in 2022 in Canada, a human error caused Rogers Communications to have a system-wide outage that affected 12 million people. Literally like 50% of mobile users in Canada couldn't access their phones for this outage. And one of the things that Facebook was down over 6 hours, one of their biggest outages since 2008 and 2021. 80 million users were impacted because someone made some configuration changes to a backbone router. Another thing, December's to remember. In December of 2023, X.com, or formerly Twitter, for anyone who's been around for any amount of time and is sensible, no one calls it X, but Twitter suffered its biggest outage since Musk's takeover, and it was pretty substantial. Most of the day, Twitter was out, and they were down to about 7,000 users at a certain point in the day. And AWS, again, had an outage in 2021 that wrecked all sorts of services. People were unable to Netflix and chill, get on Disney Plus. Major universities were unable to have tests. So that was sort of a December to remember. And Bitcoin just kind of continues on. TikTok, next block. Nothing extraordinary here. Nothing to see. Bitcoin kind of continues to do its thing. And so what can we learn from this? And how does today's events relate to Bitcoin? And I want to pull out two key lessons. One, I think one thing that we have to be cognizant of, that people in today's age are like, Bitcoin's a dinosaur, it doesn't do anything valuable. Let's make some changes to it. Let's increase the block size. Let's do X, Y, Z to make it have more functionality, reach more users, reach more people. Lesson number one, making changes to the protocol should be done with caution and humility. And lesson number two, decentralization and anti-fragility are two underlooked and undervalued benefits of Bitcoin. So let's go into this really quick. The CrowdStrike outage was a result of a software update pushed to end users without sufficient testing and development time. You see these little bugs here, there could be as cute as a caterpillar, as weird looking as this green thing, or as nasty as like a centipede. Bugs are really critical in the software world that we live in. They could get introduced to a system and bring everything, literally everything like you saw today, to a halt. So, it's interesting, the archaic but effective way that Bitcoin gets updated is this process called a BIP, or a Bitcoin improvement process, which people bring proposed ideas and changes to Bitcoin. They're then discussed amongst the community. They're then reviewed by a bunch of developers that are core developers in Bitcoin, as well as just random people, because everything in Bitcoin is done open source. And so what happens is, over time, there evolves to be some sort of consensus around the things and the changes that are going to be implemented. And these are implemented, if it's chosen to be successful, over the course of months and years through iteration. So if you hear mainnet and testnet and all of these sorts of things, these things are being put through the rigors in the process before being rolled out and introduced to a wide number of users. Let's take a listen to this clip from Michael Saylor, who talks about the different reasons for caution and humility when updating protocols like Bitcoin.
We want to introduce a new protocol change that may have catastrophic or structural inflationary impact, or it may have regulatory impact. It may deprive someone of their property rights. It may create a moral hazard, an ethical hazard, an economic hazard, an engineering hazard. All of these things need to be considered. And when you get in a hurry, what happens when you get in a hurry in a war, whether it's a war on COVID or whether it's an actual war, what happens is a central planner jams this down the society. We implement the draft, you go to war, you kill people. We implement medical policy, we implement lockdown policy, we implement centrally planned banking policy. There wasn't time, we had to shut down that bank. We had to shut down 40 million businesses. Why? We had to do it for the good of the people. And so I think that there's a lot of bad decisions that are made when you get in a hurry. And fundamentally, I would say, I'm not in favor of central planning. And I think that most of the Bitcoin community doesn't agree with central planning. So why would you want a dozen developers to centrally plan the protocol and then to make changes because they think it's academically, theoretically good for everybody? Like, you get to make the decisions for the next 1,000 years for 10 billion people just because you have a good idea? And my answer is no. I don't think that it's wise for us to encourage people to play God. I think you get to play God once. Satoshi played God. I think the rest of us ought to have the humility to say, we're not Satoshi. By the way, the odds were 10,000 to 1 against Satoshi. Satoshi rolled the dice. He won. We're good. But now, the way that empires fall is the person that inherited the United States, that inherits Bitcoin, that inherits the corporation. They think they're just as smart, and they're just going to go ahead and roll the just as hard, and they're going to play God. And I think the history books show the result. The result is they always fail. The empires always crash and burn. And the things that last are these protocols that we have respect for, like Arabic numerals. I understand protocols evolve, Peter, like the English language. The English language has evolved over 1,000 years, you know? And if you go back to the King James Bible, you know, you can understand it, but it's obviously used differently today. I'm okay with the protocol evolving over 400 years, carefully, conservatively, deliberately, because everybody says it's in our collective economic and political interest to do this. I'm just skeptical of people that have good ideas that are in a hurry that would like to change the entire network because it would make their project.
So I think there's a lot of wisdom in what Michael's saying here. Good idea in a hurry can be a bad idea. It could be catastrophic in many ways. And so taking a conservative approach and then also having the humility to understand that lightning may not strike in the same place twice. And that this innovation of this decentralized peer-to-peer network that has grown from a value of $0 to today of $67,000 per coin should be something that we tread carefully with, cautiously with, because we're impacting the entire globe. Bitcoin's network spans far wider than CrowdStrike's network, and we saw the implications that had today. So I think this is something that we should continue to think about, harp on, talk about, as being cautious. Lesson number 2. Decentralization and anti-fragility are two undervalued benefits of Bitcoin. I fundamentally believe this. For people to understand about why people say Bitcoin is decentralized. So Bitcoin nodes, these are node runners are, I would just say, like points where Bitcoin's core software is being ran around the world. And so there's a website called BitNodes where you can see that they have about 10,900 nodes around the world. These are distributed, and this number is understated because these are quote unquote reachable nodes. There's a lot of people that are running nodes that aren't broadcasting them, or maybe they're behind networks or other things. So this number is, you know, they say between 10 to 20,000, could be more. And this is really important because it doesn't matter if there's an electromagnetic pulse or you would need the capability of shutting down all of electricity across the world all at once. And guess what? It doesn't actually stop Bitcoin's network, because when Bitcoin is running at one place somewhere, it's running everywhere. And that's why they say Bitcoin is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But even if you were to shut off all the electricity in the world all at once simultaneously, when the electricity comes back on, which it will, Bitcoin's network picks up right where it left off. Nothing changed. The ledger is still the same, and the history of what happened in the transactions and people's value is still stored in the same mechanism. So really important to know. Bitcoin avoids the pitfalls from other previous projects, from Cybercash to eCash or DigiCash with David Shum, or BitGold with Nick Szabo, or even PayPal, which actually created a bare asset that was stored on the mobile device. But for reasons of scalability and other people that they were working with, like government agencies and things in the beginning, caused them to have centralized servers to track transactions and do these different things. But that wasn't the original design. of PayPal and their technology. So Bitcoin has avoided the pitfalls of other previous projects of centralization, which had a lot of the same features of Bitcoin, but ultimately failed around the choke point and the adoption point that Bitcoin has gotten out of. So the Bitcoin network, just so you know, there's users that have wallets and wallet addresses that are on the network that spend and store sats. There are nodes that maintain this global ledger or the blockchain or time chain. And then there's miners who are adding new blocks or finding new blocks of the 21 million and minting them into existence through proof of work, verifying that this thing happened when it said it did. And this nonce, number only once found, was solved for. And so it's a three-sided network, and this is really important to keep the decentralized nature of Bitcoin the way that it is. It's not just a buzzword that people talk about. And so Bitcoin, again, is a new money. It's peer-to-peer, it's decentralized, and that's a really important point that I want to highlight from this same slide that I like to go through with people. And, you know, anti-fragile, the guy who came up with this term was a guy named Nassim Taleb, who's consistently been wrong about Bitcoin. But here's one of his quotes. Some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors and love adventure, risk and uncertainty. Yet, in spite of the ubiquity of the phenomenon, there is no word for the exact opposite of fragile. Let us call it anti-fragile. Anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better. There's a saying out in the Bitcoin community that what doesn't kill Bitcoin makes it stronger. So I wanted to end our thoughts for today. Bitcoin's anti-fragility is undervalued in a centralized digital world. As these digital monopolies, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Microsofts, the CrowdStrikes, these platforms begin to own major segments of infrastructure or commodities or pieces of markets, it's important to understand why Bitcoin being decentralized is so valuable. And it's only going to become more valuable as more monopolies pop up, more data silos pop up. There's a need for a unified, decentralized global ledger in the midst of all of the chaos that's going around us. And the fact that it's anti-fragile makes it better over time, not worse. So with that, we're signing off for today. This is Dante Cook with Swan.com. Happy stacking. Feel free to check out some of the other videos and content that we have on this channel. And if you find value in these things, again, do subscribe. Have a great weekend.